Welcome everyone to the newest episode of the Old Timers Comic Book Show. The show where the hosts aren't old, but the comic books most certainly are. And for a new year, for 2022, we still have the old crew. We have the Professor. Woo!
Oh, Happy New Year, Johnny.
Happy New Year. And we have the 13th Crusader. And of course, the return of my Dolphins cap. Because, hey,
greetings.
It is the one last time I wore it, so come on.
We're in crunch time.
Yeah. 2 to go. Bottom of the ninth.
Yeah. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah, this thing that the Giants don't partake in. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Fine. Yeah.
Annual funeral for New York.
Yeah. Well, golf is alive and well within the Giants' ranks.
Golf, yeah. Oh my God! All right, okay. So, gentlemen, did you have a good New Year?
I did. I was just telling 13 that I fell asleep around 10 o'clock. So that's par for the course for New Year's Eve.
Okay, cool. Well, I saw the New Year in. So
same here. Yeah.
The bells rang and all that. So
I figured the New Year is just like the old year. So.
Yeah.
I read an awesome comic book to end 2021, but I'll save that for a review for another day.
Oh, an awesome comic. All right, okay. Any New Year's resolutions? Do you want to share?
I want to do more on the podcast side of things. I think I want to do. I actually reached out to a couple of people in the industry with Happy New Year wishes, and they came back with let's collaborate on something in the new year and see if we can make some money off of it.
Really?
I was like, I don't know what we're gonna do, but
what's this money thing? What's that all about?
A 13-cent salary, not good enough. The nerve of some people.
The nerve.
We'll see. So we'll see. So the conversations that I have with these people, we'll see what happens.
I'll share my resolution, which is I think less is more. So I want to be more targeted with what I want to acquire with comic books.
That's a shout. That's a good news resolution.
Read what you like, buy what you like. Give things a chance here and there, but if it doesn't work out, then, don't just stick with it. Yeah, don't stick with it just because, which is a tendency some collectors tend to go into.
It's a good shout. I mean, I think I've got a couple of books on my pull list that I'm buying just out of routine rather than actual genuine enjoyment of the story. So
correct,
for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, dabble into some classics I may not have dabbled into before. There's so much material since the first comic book came out. So it's just a worlds of information and enjoyable stories I'm sure that I haven't discovered yet. So that's my resolution.
All right. Okay. Cool. All well and good.
Yeah.
We shall move on to our books. As it's a new year, we decided that we would do new starts and new beginnings. So this can be anything. This could be new creative teams, new bad guys, new storylines, a whole 360-degree or 180-degree turn away from what they used to be. The list is endless. So we've got 3 books for you to peruse. First up is, I believe it's the Professor's choice. So let me just get the old screen share going on. And it is Daredevil. Where's it at the screen? There it is. Boom. Daredevil 158 from May 1979. Prices on eBay, you can get this for around £40 in the UK. Go collect, have it down at a $170 book, but that's at 9.6 grade. I looked on the eBay one, the one that's £40. You know what? It's a pretty good copy. There's not I can't see many creases in the spine or anything, so that's pretty good. Creator-wise, you've got Roger McKenzie as the writer. This is Frank Miller's first Daredevil book. You've got inks by Klaus Janson, colors by George Roussos, and letters by Joe Rosen. So, Bud, your call?
Yeah. So you know, and we were just talking about this before we started recording, but you know, with your idea of new beginnings, and I kind of went creator wise, and like, what was a big route to go with like a big creator that came onto a book, or you know, if I had put more thought behind it, I might have gone with different characters taking over the mantle, like a Jim Rhodes first Iron Man issue, or Wally West's first Flash issue, you know, something like that, where I kind of think was a big moment in those characters' history. But I think this is a big moment in the character's history as well, because it's the first Frank Miller art on Daredevil. Now, he didn't write this issue. That honor goes to Roger McKenzie, but you can see in Frank Miller's first Daredevil issue just the signs of things to come. Just in his artwork with his page layouts and the action sequences, the villains, the Animen, very forgettable at the end, and then of course Deathstalker, this is his final appearance. You know, big spoiler alert for a book that came out 40 years ago, but. This book was like the first really that, you know, when I first started reading Daredevil, I started reading with the Frank Miller run. You know, I wasn't really a big fan of Daredevil until Frank Miller came on the book. And since then, when I've gone back and read all the other Daredevils prior, and I think overall, I think Gene Colan's my favorite Daredevil artist, but I would go Frank Miller as far as where did he bring this character and how did he update this character for the going into the 80s. And we're talking the introduction of Elektra, Bullseye. I almost said something else. But bringing the Kingpin over and making him the biggest bad in Daredevil ever, using much better than he was ever used in Spider-Man, I think. But watching Frank Miller over the course of the next few years on this book, when you look at the artwork here, even on the splash page, they announced the coming of Frank Miller.
Right there.
Right? You know, they think that he's going to be the next best thing, right? So
yeah, he was. I mean,
and he was. And when you look at the layouts in this book, the art, the shadowing, the use of blacks, it is not what Frank Miller at the end is, but it's the signs of what he's going to become. Especially the final scene in the graveyard, I thought was great. And
get there.
Yep, and I don't think anybody draws a better Daredevil fight scene, I think, than Frank Miller.
Okay.
So yeah, that's I think why I wanted to pick a Frank Miller. I think as far as new beginnings, I think he had the most or the biggest effect on a character in a book, other than Lee and Kirby, who created everybody, right? But having a Frank Miller come on this book and take this book to new heights, because let's be honest, this book was being published bi-monthly in 1979, and it was one of Marvel's lower sellers. And within a few months after coming on this book, the book went monthly, and history is made.
I think you're absolutely right. I think Frank Miller is a revolutionary when it came to Daredevil, and his later work especially became revolutionary. Is he one of the characters, one of the creators who can really turn the flagship around like this? There are others. I mean, I'm sure 13th will throw out Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams for both Batman and for Green Arrow. But here's a question for you both regarding Frank Miller, just kind of something to think of. And
Sure.
Bud, we'll go with you first, and then 13th, because Bud, this is your book. Frank Miller, is he a better artist or is he a better writer?
That is a great question.
I know.
Because you want to think like some of his best work has been writing, right? Like Daredevil Born Again, he didn't draw that.
No.
And what was he? What else did he write? Batman Year One. I think he wrote, but he didn't do the art. So some of those moments are some of his best moments have been writing. But when I think of Frank Miller and I think his classic art and like Sin City and stuff like that, that's where I say Frank Miller shines.
All right. Okay. Cool. Frank Miller was the artist on Dark Knight Returns.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure he was, as well as the writer. All right. So 13th. What about yourself? Where do you sit on this?
I go to the artist side first because that's how he got his name recognized.
Oh, okay.
It to me it was pretty simple to answer. Yeah, he has done great many a story right on the writing venture, but that wasn't until later on. But if it wasn't for his art, where would we be today? Especially for Daredevil's sake, right? Because a lot of titles in the 70s for Marvel were not doing too well in general,
All right.
right?
Okay.
So we saw a lot of revivals, right? X-Men, etc. You know, in the late 70s. But how many titles were canceled? How many characters were squeezed together in anthologies or team ups?
Yeah.
How many villains were thrown away from one book into another,
Mm-hmm.
right? A la Electro with Spider-Man thrown into Daredevil early on. Even for
Mm-hmm.
Kingpin, even after this, you know, Kingpin was thrown into Daredevil, into the pages of Daredevil, and how did that work out?
Mm.
So when you combine all of that and you want to talk about Frank Miller, this is really where it starts.
Hmm. See, I think this is, from my point of view, I don't think this is Frank Miller's best work.
No, it's not
I,
supposed to be. It's
but
supposed
I
to be
think it's
where it began, where his
yeah.
name was thrown out there.
Okay, cool. I
He had
agree
a
with.
look at the first page, like Bud said, right? That's a hell of an introduction by a bunch of Marvel creators welcoming in an artist. So we went from a period of time where people weren't even credited for their work
Mhm.
to now where they're put on a pedestal, and this guy was put on a pedestal from day one.
I'm not gonna lie. I got distracted by Black Widow's legs on the next page. So that was a, so I was like, whoop. So,
And let's, we'll remember that in Daredevil, like Daredevil went from bi-monthly to monthly and then back to bi-monthly.
mm,
And then it went back to monthly. So that, I mean, the sales story on Daredevil is really kind of an up and down history. And having someone like a Frank Miller come on here, and then within a few months, I want to say within the first 4 or 5 issues, it went monthly.
mhm.
I,
So
yeah, you
the,
could
the
even make the argument that Frank Miller defined Daredevil at this period of time.
yes,
Yes, I give you. I give that one. I certainly agree with that one. For me, I think. What do you think? We'll start with 13, I guess. So 13, what do you think of this book as a whole? Then, I mean, we've talked about Frank Miller as a writer or an artist. You've got an artist. What do you think of this book then, from the Professor's Choice?
It brought a lot of buried memories, and what I mean by that is I used to be an aficionado reading like the Marvel Universe handbook.
All
So I
right,
remember
yeah.
reading the Marvel Universe Book of the Dead,
yep,
and Deathstalker was an entry in there, and I'm like, I at that time I had never heard of this guy, but the images that they put in that book came from here,
Mm-hmm.
yep,
and I'm like, oh, I remember these images, and the one that stuck out the most is not just the cover, but then you see the cover reenacted later on within the pages of uh of the villain going right through the tombstone.
yep,
Yeah.
So one he's going through the tombstone on the cover, and then the other one they're showing him in the Marvel universe how he died.
Mm-hmm.
Even the battle scene where Daredevil is taking a backwards leap, he almost fell into his own grave,
Yeah.
is in there. And they showed the Deathstalker killing the Unholy Three, or two of the Unholy Three, is
Yeah.
also an image. This is like right off the top of my head because I used to read those books cover to cover all the time. I quoted from them. I researched off them because that's how you had to do it back then. There wasn't any internet.
hmm
What? There was no
So,
internet.
nope.
How did we manage? How did we?
So I'm like, okay, so now I actually get a chance to read this character in action. And the extra treat, obviously, as we've been talking about, is watching Frank Miller go to work. So I appreciate that. I like the use of shading in here
Mm-hmm.
in the early Frank Miller work. Bud hit the nail right on the head that this is only a preview
Yeah.
of what was to come for Frank Miller. The angles are exceptional. I think some of the panels in his early work were a little too tight,
Yeah.
but
I agree with that.
otherwise, like later on, that wouldn't be the case. So it looks like in this particular issue, they tried to cram in a lot of action, which is great for the reader,
Mm-hmm.
but it just shrinks the artwork a little bit.
I think you've got to also bear in mind that it's the first book. It's his first
Right,
book, so his style hasn't developed, and
right,
he has to follow in the Marvel way, which is make your art look something like the guy who did it last, please.
Right.
Thanks. So he's stuck in that kind of rut where he's trying to do his own thing, but then unfortunately it becomes more Marvel. And then when people say to you, what do I mean by that? Some of Frank Miller's earliest work in comic books were the Hostess and Twinkie ads.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at those and you look at those adverts and see how mainstream that art has to look. That's what I'm talking about, a house style. Yeah, so do not deviate from the accepted norm, which is going to come up in the next book as well a little bit. I think.
To Bud's point, the cemetery scene speaks to all of Frank Miller's strengths, and you could see it very early on. Everything was in the dark. The Daredevil turned off the lights, right? And that's where Frank Miller shines. No pun intended.
Ironically.
Yeah. So, but it's exceptional artwork for your first work in Daredevil. It's phenomenal.
And of course, 10 issues later, when he takes over the writing chores too, is when the book really takes off.
Yeah,
because he's not writing to a script; he's just doing his thing.
And that's you kind of sometimes. People always talk about writers versus artists and vice versa, but for me, not every artist can write, just like not every writer can draw. So I think Frank Miller is one of those handful of people that excels at both.
Yes.
Has his art become more extreme in recent times? Yeah, it has. I mean, we looked at over on the Definitive Crusade, which is available on the UCPN, the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. We looked at Dark Knight Returns 3, and the artwork is just it's to the extreme, you know. So but he's kind of evolved. He's evolved from this to Sin City to and so on. The Wolverine book was great that he did with Claremont.
Yeah.
The miniseries. So for me, writing is for me. I find his writing interesting. I like it a lot. Apart from RoboCop 2, the movie. Sorry, but that movie sucks. But comic book wise, I mean, the guy's he's an absolute great. And this is a really good choice. Really good choice to go back and look at this. There were a couple of story nods that I kind of shook my head at a little bit. It seems quite. You're right, Bud. The book seems quite forgettable in places. You know, the villains of the piece are just the villains of the piece. What I kind of sort of shook my head at this point is, how does he not know that that's not Natasha? His radar sense is supposed to be like super great that he can actually hear people's heartbeats and work out who they are.
He doesn't hear the wheelchair coming.
and that's it. You know, you can't work out someone sat down versus someone stood up. It's a different thing on his radar. And I think, is it lazy? Is it just played for the pathos of the scene? It's played for the pathos, of course it is. But yeah, I was reading the book. It seems like every girl in this book fancies Matt Murdock. It's not the bad guy 3. It's the Lovelorn 3.
Well, he's swinging a big cane. That's why.
Yeah, well, didn't see
that.
that.
You know, that was like been a staple in the Daredevil books for years. Was that he's always had too many women just kind of falling at his feet. So
he's not Batman. Just saying. So I think £40 is a reasonable price to pay for this book. I think you're absolutely right.
That surprised me that it was that cheap. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even 170 seems cheap to me.
Yeah,
for a book that's 40 years old. All right, there you go. Good start. So we've gone with the new beginning for Daredevil in that it is the new creator that came on and revolutionized the character for loads of people. We talk about Daredevil, but you talked about Daredevil on No Prize.
Oh yeah, well, current Daredevil, yeah.
Yeah, and I've been saying for ages that the current Daredevil run, especially with him being in prison and Lady Daredevil, has been fantastic.
Yes,
that run will be this generation's version of Born Again.
I think so too. And you know, I mean, we're not talking about the newer comics, but I think that Daredevil's history has been very up and down, where he's gone through cycles of being very readable and then very not readable. So
Yeah.
he's right now, it's like a renaissance time for Daredevil.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. Agreed. All right, we're going to swing on over onto our next book. It is the 13th Crusader, and he has gone with The Amazing Spider-Man number 298 from November 1987. On eBay, you can get this anywhere from £55 to £120. On Go Collect, for a 9.6, you'd pay $260. Written by Bud David.
Oh, David Michelinie. Yeah.
Thank you. I always get it wrong. Art by Todd McFarlane. Inks by Bob McLeod. Colors by Janet Jackson. Sorry. Letters by Rick Parker and Ken Lopez. All right. So, first Todd book, first Eddie Brock, first Venom. Tell me, is this the reason why you picked this book, 13?
Many reasons. First
All right.
off, I really thought it was Janet Jackson that colored it.
I said Janet Jackson, didn't I?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. She used to say nasty boys don't mean a thing. Remember that?
Yeah. Well, I also think, what have you done for me lately? But, you know.
Oh, that's the way love goes sometimes, right?
do.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not jumping in on this.
Bud's not going to embarrass himself by knowing Janet Jackson songs. He just wants to scream.
Oh, jeez.
Well done, Machine. Well done. Very good. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons why I chose this book. First, for nostalgia, I remember specifically during this time, my mom was pregnant with my brother.
Okay.
And I was helping my mom around the house and things like that, and she would send me off on all these errands, and I loved it. Why? Because I got a little bit of the cut. Like if there was some change left over from things I had to buy for her, I would save that up, and what would I do with it? Go to the newsstand. And this was one of the books I remember getting right off the newsstand, and I was like, yeah, this looks pretty sick. I saw the cover. I'm like, something's a little different, but I'll give it a whirl. Story wise, okay, whatever. But I did notice a change.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know who this McFarlane guy is, even though he had been around, right? Because we've seen him in the pages of Batman and what have you. But his art style back then was pretty much run of the mill, like mimicking some of the Batman artists previous to him. It was not really his style.
You think?
So, right.
You think, really?
So in 1987, long time ago, this is where McFarlane's name started to elevate. It didn't reach its peak yet, but this is where it starts. So this issue is significant for me because and for a lot of reasons. One, it brings back a lot of memories of me just, Mom, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? You just went to the store. Well, I'll go again. So I could just go get some money to buy comics. And I was totally invested in Spider-Man books. And it really started getting really strong with this issue. It kind of just like, I don't want to miss anything. This was the issue that really said to me, I don't know, I think this is taking a different turn. So remember, at this point in time, you had Peter Parker still running. You also had Web of Spider-Man that just kind of got off. Was 14, 15 issues deep at this time. So I'm like, yes, Spider-Man's taking a direction that I like. Plus, I'm a sucker for the black uniform of Spider-Man. I've always been. This version, the non-symbiote version, right? So the story, in a way, is kind of lackluster. You're going to see a villain named Chance who did appear in Web of Spider-Man, and mercenary for hire, run-in-the-mill villain for me at this time.
Agreed.
But what you're always going to see with Peter Parker still stays true, right? He's a loser. he has a trophy wife in Mary Jane Watson at this point, and he still doesn't know how to handle his life. So that you're like, okay, if you were off of Spider-Man and you jump into this issue after a while, you're like, okay, nothing's changed as far as that's concerned. But you do start seeing some subtle differences, right? The way he draws Spider-Man, the webbing right off the bat, the way he draws the webbing was something that was way more detailed than what you would see from previous artists.
Spaghetti webbing.
The spaghetti webbing, correct. So although I think like in some scenes it's hard for a colorist to go in there and color this. You can even look at the cover where some of the strands are filled in perfect, but the further away you go, the more gray they just throw in no matter where the webbing is. So that was one thing that I noticed right off the bat. I also noticed the positioning of Spider-Man, the way he was swing around town or even drop down as you're showing there was a little different. The angle is different. So that started giving me hints of the art is different, right?
Right.
Because we all know what McFarlane's art graduated to. But if you want to see his early work on Spider-Man, Peter Parker's hair is different. Mary Jane, even the way she's standing, and if you go a few pages further, Machine with Peter Parker wearing a robe, you see Mary Jane in fishnets. You got to go back.
Yeah,
And
I saw that. Don't
but
worry, I've
right
noticed. I've noticed the fishnets. Don't worry.
I knew you would. But if you see how she's positioned there,
Yeah.
you know, the hairstyle is different. You know, at this time she was a model making tons of money. Her positioning is perfect. Just even the way that they look at each other is different. So these are the subtle things that McFarlane threw in there. If you go to the next page or so, when they have that big meeting, you could see more like the guy on the bottom. That's definitely a clear sign of McFarlane art to come.
Great.
You will see artwork like this in pages of Spawn later on. But the bottom line is that with McFarlane's early work on Spider-Man, this is what really catapulted him to fame, to the point where, as we mentioned on a previous podcast, I think the professor mentioned it, that McFarlane was offered his own Spider-Man book.
Yep.
So his run on Amazing lasted a couple years. He got his own book, and then he quit. We all know the reasons why. He didn't want to be working to anyone else's script.
It was an Image issue, wasn't it?
Yep. And then he went and founded Image. But what also makes this significant for collectors is Venom. You're going to start seeing the shadow appearance of Venom. So the way I categorize it, maybe you guys can disagree with me, because some people say, no, this is the first Venom. No, it isn't. It's, to me, it's the first Shadow. The next one is the first cameo. And then 300 is the first full Venom. How do you settle it? Buy all three.
Good luck.
So
very true.
I got all three of those off the newsstand. And who would have thought that after all this time, how highly sought after all three of those books are for a number of reasons, for Venom, and then obviously for McFarlane, because this is where he really got his jump or his 15 minutes of fame with those three issues right there. And it was just the beginning. So I did love the McFarlane era of Amazing Spider-Man. This is where it started, and I was just hooked. This was, to me, my number one. I have to be there when it's released book. I have to be there. If I don't find it at the newsstand, I would have walked to wherever I needed to go until I found the issue. And this is what I used to do back in Brooklyn. If one newsstand wouldn't have it, I'll take the train, go to another one where I felt was more reliable. I didn't care. I just could not miss an issue of McFarlane drawn Spider-Man.
Very good. Very good. Professor, your thoughts on Chance Encounter?
I'm one of those people that really like Chance as a villain, and I really like his portrayal on the cover here. I think that's the best drawing of Chance that McFarlane's done.
Yeah, agreed.
I actually liked that this kind of villain where they're not really bad, they just go to the highest bidder, kind of like a mercenary kind of guy.
Yeah.
The other villains that have come to mind that are similar, like Black Fox, some like Spider-Man villains like that. I like you find out like at the end of the issue when the bad guys kind of turn on Chance that he's just kind of a victim of circumstance on that end. But I kind of like his gimmick. It's kind of almost like a kind of like almost like Two-Face. Let's flip a coin. He kind of, $10,000. So he'll do it. They make a bet.
Yeah.
In 13, you're so right about the first kind of glimmers of McFarlane and what's to come with him too, because Mary Jane is portrayed so differently in look. I think this is I always pictured the dimples of Mary Jane that Romita threw in there in first appearance, but here it's like that is the focal point. You see the dimples and then the hair. She always had the same exact hairstyle until McFarlane got to her.
Right.
And then as the super hot supermodel, McFarlane's the first one to actually draw her to make her look like a Cindy Crawford type supermodel. And that's really, I kind of think, I always think if there wasn't a Todd McFarlane, would Image even existed? Because I kind of think that McFarlane was more of like the driving force, and you can look from the past 30 years how much success Spawn has had or McFarlane has had and branched out. You knew he was the business guy of the bunch, right? So that's where I kind of feel like if McFarlane never gets hired to do Spider-Man, I don't think we ever get Image. I think maybe Jim Lee sticks around the X-Men for a few more years.
That's a very interesting conversation, Professor. I gotta admit.
I kind of agree. I agree with you, because I think Liefeld would just have shot himself in the foot massively.
Well, and he did eventually anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there's no way Lee was leaving Marvel without being pushed.
Right.
So, or without being cajoled, I should say.
Right.
Because he had just like his baby. He was like, he was happy with a regular paycheck.
Yeah, and McFarlane was the one. I mean, didn't he created Spawn way before he ever worked for Marvel, right? And then
that's correct. Yeah.
So he actually, I think, transported elements of Spawn into the Spider-Man book, and I think that made more of a believable jump, because I know when Spawn first came out, everybody was like, it kind of looks like Spidey a little bit, with the cape and everything, but
the eyes.
Yeah, but when you kind of realize, what came first, then you kind of like, well, I think McFarlane at the time had to kind of put elements of that into this book, and that just made him,
Yeah. If I could jump in for one quick second, you just said the eyes, right? So this is an artist that Freya would appreciate, our colleague over in Definitive Crusade, because she has this big thing against artists that don't finish faces and don't draw eyes properly. Well, you don't get that with McFarlane.
All right.
So, and I that is a very that's another attribute that sticks out immediately, and it would only get more exaggerated, I think, in the pages of Spawn. Then the second thing I just wanted to mention briefly was the blackout that was mentioned in this book is significant because it ties into X Factor that Louise Simonson was writing and Walt Simonson was drawing in the Fall of the Mutants, when the X Factor was battling Apocalypse in New York and the Four Horsemen, or three of the Four Horsemen. So it was a significant issue there. So this has a very important tie-in.
Okay.
Continuity in the Marvel books.
Exactly.
Who misses that?
Right. Before you get my thoughts on this, what's this? Before you get my thoughts on this book, we're going to take a quick breather, so you can have a look at one of our lovely adverts. It seems to me where we're at. All right. So because we're looking at a Marvel book, I think it's only fair that we look for a no prize. Here we go. There you go, the No Price Podcast. It is out yesterday.
We recorded yesterday.
It also comes out on the day before this comes out, so there you go.
Yes.
You go.
Very soon.
Yeah, serendipity. All right, so what was I going to
the first mention of the new No Prize podcast, and then it'll be the first appearance later this week.
There you go. Cool.
Be a
All right,
cameo.
so
Yeah.
so let's have my thought that we've on this. Okay, so yes, McFarlane is great and he has a cartoony style. I would like to say I noticed the fishnet straight away, but unfortunately, nobody in their right mind ever lies like that. Come on, there's no way that left leg looks like that if the right leg's doing that. I'm sorry. Tut tut tut. However, that fishnet's a lot better. Just saying. And then, of course, the one where she's against the door is also pretty cool. Right, fishnets aside, we talked about this earlier about having a Marvel style. Now, look at Mary Jane in this picture here. There, and that one there, where she's on the phone. That is the classic, just the face-wise, the classic Mary Jane dimple look. Agreed?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, later on, we get, oh my God, look how expression she is here. Look at her nose has changed. So McFarlane has a certain style, all right, and this comes to fore in later books. At this point in his career, Marvel is still saying, well, you know what? I will get that you can draw faces like this guy here, super detailed, lots of effort gone into that, but then his Peter Parker gets nicely smoothed out into the Ramita style to make sure that he looks like the Peter Parker that everyone knows. This changes when as McFarlane's presence and popularity grows. How he shows Peter's face and Mary Jane's face changes dramatically. All right, so that's kind of that's kind of what I was saying about earlier about Marvel having a house style and trying to stay on point with the model of the character.
Well, that's all on editorial at that point, and we
Yeah,
know
yeah.
editorial had a firm hand back in the. I heard something about that Venom was supposed to be a woman originally.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Something about where I think she saw Spider-Man swinging around in a car, and then her husband died in
yeah.
a crash, and that was
That's
supposed to, but the editorial turned it down. So
so. I heard a story that this could be conceived as not even Venom's first appearance. Venom's first appearance is a Web of Spider-Man storyline in which Peter Parker gets pushed onto the rail tracks on a subway station by something that doesn't set off his spider sense. That was going to be the introduction of Venom.
I read the same thing. Yeah.
Yep, so hey
yeah,
ho.
and that's
So,
the thing at this time, right? Because
yeah,
all three titles are running at the same time.
yeah,
So now it becomes a matter of what came first, kind of like the first appearance of Huntress, where you
yeah.
get her in 2 issues on the same day.
Yeah, cool. The thing about the eyes, so this Spider-Man picture here, this is the absolute what you're going to get moving forward. You know, look how his chin is, look how the eyes are so expression. And I think if Marvel had kept the black suit for McFarlane, I don't think he would have become as prevalent as he would become down the line. When they've got changed to the red and blues, he gets more spider poses going on. He's more elbows and knees, and that
Yep.
level of detail in the artwork comes through. You can't do that on an all black suit,
Right.
you know. So the going to the red and blues certainly gave McFarlane the freedom to really ramp up those odd positions. And there's like the start of a one there, you know. That's kind of there was always 1 foot up and there was always one knee behind his head and all that sort of stuff. So yes, great book, daft villain. Very much like the Daredevil one. I can take it or leave it. In fact, all three of these books share the same sort of villain etiquette that they're not exactly the groundbreaking villains, but no, an interesting read. I used to have a lot of the McFarlane Spider-Mans.
I still
And,
do.
yeah,
Same here.
I don't have them anymore. So, oh, what a shame. But no, it is what it is. It's a snapshot of Marvel at the time. You know, it's the start of potentially art taking over from the importance of writing, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that was true certainly when McFarlane was handed the keys to write his own Spider-Man book. How many copies did that sell? So you can argue that they made so many variants for that first issue, and that's what made the money swell up to its profit level. But either way, a lot was sold because it's a new Spider-Man #1 book. You had that same excitement with Web of Spider-Man, but when Spider-Man 1 came out, it was different because we saw McFarlane's handiwork in Amazing already.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, this is his own playground. Now they're going to let him run loose. And fans gravitated to that. There's no denying that.
It's interesting because I personally think his Spider-Man book wasn't particularly well written.
I think it was terrible.
Yeah.
It looked great.
Right.
But it wasn't well written.
Can I mention that I think that McFarlane getting his own book and moving over to that also opens up the door for Eric Larson to become a superstar too.
Yep.
Agreed.
So,
agreed.
And you noticed the difference right away with Eric Larson as soon as he jumped on this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely. Right. Okay. That's it. So we're up to my choice now. Excellent. So I went with this book, and there's a reason why. So I went with Batman 217. There you go. And the reason, I'll give you the dates on this. So this Batman 217 is from 1969. So it's the oldest book that we've got on today's show. Price-wise, on eBay, you can get it for around, I'm watching the one on eBay right now that's £34 in very fine for very fine condition. It can go up to £269. Couldn't find it on Go Collect when I looked. So it's written by Frank Robbins, art by Irv Novick, who's for me one of the unsung heroes of Batman. Inks by Dick Giordano, letters by Ben Order. I realise that I've missed a colorist out there, so I'll get to that in a second. For me, I went with this book because it's hard to find the definitive book when Batman went from Kapow Wow from the TV show back to his Dark Knight detective roots. When you look for it, when you type that sort of thing into Google, it always brings up the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams stuff. But this book was one of the ones that started the whole idea first. So you've kind of got a massive story point in that Robin is leaving. He's leaving Wayne Manor. Bless him. He's finally graduated. He's off to Hudson University, still in his little pixie boots and trunks. Bless him. His legs will get cold. What can I say? Should have worn fishnets, dudes. Anyway, Bruce decides that enough's enough. They're not going to live in the manor anymore, and they're going to move to what is going to be the 70s base of operation, the Wayne Foundation. Now, this Wayne Foundation building is not like the same one we've seen already, or we get to see in the future, the one with the tree in the middle, because that's a crazy building for whatnot. But there's a crime in here. It's not a massive particularly thing, but it's interesting because in Batman's point of his existence, this is getting back to that Dark Knight detective. Another interesting point is there's definitely more Bruce Wayne than there is Batman in this book. So maybe they should have, called the book Bruce Wayne instead. But hey ho. But I like these bits here where he's kind of like got the shadowing of himself, using his detective brain to do things on this, to work out stuff.
It's probably because they thought they needed more Batman in the book.
Yeah, because he hasn't been around so long. So yeah, let's put some bats in it. Art-wise, I think the art works really well. It's of its time. Let's page slap bang in the middle. Why would you do that? It's a lot more robust, I think, than what eventually happens to Irv Novick's art, which is gets elongated, it becomes more lanky, longer. Part of that will be some of the Neil Adams reflection that goes on there, because art imitates art down the line. But I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was a great slice of what Batman was at the time, and getting him back to his Dark Knight detective roots. There you go. Love the colours. Did I find out who did the colours? Let's have a quick look. It does not say. That's why I did not write it down. Okay, there you go. Excellent. Okay, 13. Start us on this one, because you're our DC fan.
I think I have this book buried somewhere. I'm gonna have to double check on that. But one thing that sticks out to me right away is the cover, and I get a kick out of seeing the clothing rack with Robin's uniform on it. Why wouldn't they do this when Jason Todd kicked the bucket? This is exactly what I would have done with Jason Todd. So it tells you what I think about Jason Todd.
Hook him on the clothes horse.
Yeah, not even worthy to be putting up in a trophy case. Just hang it up there, Alfred. Let it collect webbing.
That's a different book, dude.
Yeah, well, that's a segue from the Spider-Man review we did. But I think the
Oh,
cover is powerful. You know,
agreed.
you see Alfred there. You know, kind of like, you know, Dick Grayson has gone off to school. It's
Yeah.
going to be different because he's been here for so long. The manor is too big for us. You know, that's how they thought back then. And Batman's like, yeah, we need a new change, and off they go.
Mhm.
Um, Again, yeah, Irv Novick is one of those lost names, unfortunately. When speaking about Batman, sometimes I don't think he gets mentioned, and I always say the same for Dick Giordano. You
Agreed.
know, he's just these are just permanent fixtures in Batman lore. Frank Robbins, you know, what can I say? The story is simple. It's all about Dick Grayson moving on. This won't be the first time we see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with Dick Grayson, obviously later on in the pages of New Teen Titans, but this is really the start of Robin becoming a man, sort of, or his own person, right? I don't need to be hanging out with Batman all the time to be myself. I
Mm-hmm.
got to go to school. I got to grow up. And he kind of shows that, you know, here when he, in the part of the story where he's like, yeah, you know, I hate long goodbyes, and he sheds a tear, but he's basically trying to rush so he doesn't have to say goodbye. So he does
Yeah.
have more feelings than Bruce Wayne ever would, but he learned from Bruce Wayne to just move on and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly what Batman does. Um, I agree with Johnny. It starts focusing more on detective type stories and, you know, just not low level crime, but lower tier villains,
Mm-hmm.
and putting them in a situation that, you know, you kind of have to think of, like, who shot who did this,
Mm-hmm.
when, what's the angle here, what's the trick, what did we miss? You know, it's really more like a cop book
Mm.
if you really think about it. It's just that there's Batman in it.
Uh,
Um,
And that's dramatically different from what the TV show was.
Correct.
And we've got to think that TV show only ended, what was that, 66? It only ended, it
Hmm.
was on for 3 seasons, so it only ended just around the corner of when this book was starting to come out.
And that's the thing with Batman, you know, and it's same could be said with characters that have just been around for so many
Mm-hmm.
decades. They enter these periods of, you know, fame.
Mm-hmm.
They dip back to almost obscurity. And then we got to do a change. Come on, you know, the sales are bad. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just try anything. You know, I felt like this maybe maybe kicked off a small period of like a lull for Batman, because if you're into like Batman, like the old campy ones, that's it. It's over.
Mm-hmm.
If you're into the more detective side, you may be happy, but you're not seeing as much Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And then where are the villains?
Yeah.
No comic book is complete without a villain that you're going to remember forever. And then Batman had loads of them even for this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, Batman has had its ups and downs. And like you said, Johnny, this was a really good pick. It really came out of the woodworks because it just symbolizes the end of one era and the beginning of another. You know, the fact that there are many Batman fans out there that love Batman operating out of the Batcave. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's gone now with this.
Done. Yeah.
It's done. And now he's, you know, you're seeing Alfred maybe a little bit more after this,
Mm-hmm.
which is okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, there's nothing wrong with Alfred, but you know, Robin, you know, later on we'll see that a few years later, what, a decade later maybe, he's in the pages of Batman Family,
Yeah.
you know, a little bit more mature. You
Mm-hmm.
see him in school, same for Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. So things were different for Batman at this time. I can see traces of Dick Giordano in here, especially when Batman is in his Batman outfit, in his costume. I see it with the inking and some of the facial poses. I
Mm-hmm.
see Dick Giordano in here. So overall, you know, it's an interesting start. I'd say, you know, as a collector, if you're into Batman, this is one that you should have. It's again, I love this book probably more for the cover than anything else, than really
Mm-hmm.
what happens in the story, because Batman has gotten so many soft starts,
Mm-hmm.
reboots. Same for the characters within the pages of the book. But I think this cover really is a very, very strong Batman cover, in my opinion.
Excellent. And it's not until the 1970 when Denny O'Neil comes around with Neil Adams, and that's when you start getting the classic Dark Knight detective stories that I mentioned. So,
But they were gradual with the villains that they brought in.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, bam, here we are, and here's the entire rogues gallery, or boom, in homage to John Madden.
Boom.
Yeah. So, but this is a very, very powerful cover, in my opinion.
Cool. Professor.
Yeah, I'm not a big old DC fan, but I mean, I like this when you look at it. The three creators that get credit on this, Norvik and Giordano and Frank Robbins, they all have history dating back into the golden age. So it's like, when you think about the amount of talent that DC had working for them at the time, old school. And Marvel had a few old schoolers like George Russo's, who we talked about in the Daredevil issue. But the DC was really where it was at if you were like a old school guy looking for work. But there was a few things distracting. The lettering in this book, the not really so much the lettering as the word balloons. They're very they look like clouds, and they're distracting. There's a couple of pages where it's just a ton of them, like a very wordy, and it just seems like they just kind of lettered it right on the page and then kind of drew a circle like a cloud around it to make it fit, So it was kind of a little distracting on that end because I was looking at the different shapes of the words. But other than that, there was more, I guess, better detective type stories yet to come for Batman.
Definitely.
This was probably one of the not so great. Like this was kind of like the by the numbers type of detective story where you find out at the end who the killer is, and then they throw this, the killer knew that we were going to be looking for someone that was shot in the arm or with a sling, someone whose arm was in a sling. And I was like, the killers aren't that smart.
That's a fair shout. It's a fair shout. And I think that's probably the crux for all of these books, isn't it? Because we know that Frank Miller goes on to do better things. We know that Todd McFarlane's style becomes massive. We know that the Dark Knight Detective becomes such a huge thing that it carries Batman through the 70s to most of the 80s before Dark Knight Returns comes in. So we know that there's more to come from this point. So these are kind of, for people who are checking these books out, these are kind of the starting points. They're the new start.
Yeah, when you start thinking about like where like you just said, where Batman was even like a couple of months before this issue with the Batman 66, in the camp and the tune in next week kind of death trap of the day. This was a different type of story, and they write Robin out of the book like right at the beginning of the story, and you realize like going forward in Batman, like Robin doesn't really turn up that much anymore. He's off doing his own thing with the Titans, and I think that 10-year between the 70s, that's where Batman the detective really comes becomes the Dark Knight really. And this, what was like just a few months after this that Neil Adams starts all his stuff.
A couple of things I absolutely did not like that every character called Alfred Alf and Alfie. I know it's 70s hip and all that, but come on, or 60s hip in this one.
Well, it makes sense. There wasn't any cats hanging around Wayne Manor. For anyone that remembers the old Alf shows.
My New Year's resolution for 13th is to get better jokes. There you go.
I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work either.
Is that what the HU in the Dick Grayson shirt stands for? Humor University?
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you guys must have Christmas crackers like we have, and you pull them apart and we've got a joke in the middle. Yeah.
Those are fortune cookies over here.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Cool. Did you have Christmas crackers? Oh no. Okay. Cool. All right. So that's it for our first show of 2022. 3 new start books to peruse and see if you can locate via hook or by crook. Some classics, some interesting takes on existing characters moving forward. Excellent. Right. I think that wraps it up for this week, guys. Don't
Muy
forget.
bien.
Muy bien. Don't forget to check out the Undercover Capes podcasting network for all your favorite shows, including Professor.
No Prize Podcast, all about Marvel Comics at Disney Plus and the MCU.
There you go. It's like a one-stop shop.
It is.
The one-stop shop. And of course, where there's a Marvel book, there's a DC book. So don't forget to check out the Definitive Crusade, TDC, for me and Matthew and Josh. And Fairway returns in the new year. All right, excellent. Okay, guys, hope you had a good new year. Let's have some wealth, fame, and fortune, I think, for 2022. And as always, I'm your host, Johnny Machine Hughes. Adios.